the desperate call, the skies over Dravik Prime were burning. Explosions echoed across the planet's surface. The Zarkon warships, like massive birds of prey, swooped down and unleashed hell. The Dravakians, once a proud and peaceful species, were struggling to hold onto their world. Their cities, their homes, were crumbling under the force of the Zarkon invasion. The Dravakian people had never fought a war like this. Their enemies were unlike any they had seen before, ruthless, unrelenting, and powerful. The Zarkons showed no mercy. Their soldiers advanced with fire and destruction, tearing through the Dravakian defenses as if they were made of paper. Inside the Dravakian High Command, General Carr paced back and forth. His mind raced. The situation was growing worse by the hour. His people were dying, their cities were falling, and the Zarkon fleet was coming closer with each passing minute. "We can't hold them off much longer," Carr muttered to himself, his voice filled with dread. He turned to the officers in the room, all of whom looked just as tired and worried. "The last of our defenses are failing. The enemy will reach the capital by nightfall." One of the younger officers stepped forward, a tablet in hand. He spoke in a low voice, almost afraid of the truth. "We've sent messages to every nearby system. No one has responded." Carr's face hardened. No one," the officer replied. "We've asked for help, but nothing." There was a brief silence in the room as the weight of the situation settled in. The Dravakians had always believed in diplomacy, in peace. They had never needed to fight. But now they were on the edge of extinction. They needed help. They needed someone who could save them. "Send the message again," Carr commanded, his voice firm. "This time, send it to Earth. They may be our last hope." The room fell silent again. Earth, a far-off planet in another galaxy. No one had ever imagined they would ask for help from there. But General Carr knew there was no other choice. The Zarkons would not stop until the entire planet was wiped out. They needed help, and they needed it now. On Earth, deep inside a hidden government facility, Ash stood in front of a large monitor. His eyes were focused, calm. The last battle had nearly broken him, but he had survived. His team had survived, and now they were on standby. He had been given many orders before, but none like this. When the message came through, it was simple. No fancy words, no diplomacy, just a short, desperate plea. "Help, the Zarkons have attacked. We are losing, we need backup." Ash looked at the message. There was no time to waste. The Dravakian people needed help, but Ash knew better than anyone that Earth wasn't sending an army. They would send what they could, and Ash was one of those sent. Behind him, the other members of his team prepared. Hex, the tech expert, silently worked on disabling communication jammers. Wraith, the silent assassin, checked her weapons with deadly precision. Cutter, the demolition expert, studied the maps of Dravik Prime, planning their way into the enemy's heart. Ghost, the scout, quietly monitored the enemy's movements from his terminal. Ash nodded to them. "We're going in. No backup. Just us, back on Dravik Prime." The Council of Leaders watched in confusion as the Earth ships descended. 5 ships, no more, no less. They expected an army, a fleet of ships, maybe even a full battalion of soldiers. But 5, it didn't make sense. One of the council members turned to General Carr. 5 ships. They must be joking. Carr shook his head. They wouldn't joke about this. Earth may be far, but they wouldn't send soldiers unless they meant it. The 5 ships landed silently on the planet's surface, sending small clouds of dust. into the air. The Dravakian leaders gathered on the landing pad, uncertain of what they would find. The first figure to step out of the ship was Ash. His eyes were cold, but calm. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The others followed behind him, Hicks, Wraith, Cutter, and Ghost. Each one wore simple armor, no insignia, no flags. They weren't soldiers. They were something else entirely. Carr approached them, his confusion still evident. You're from Earth. Ash's voice was low and steady. We are, and we've come to end this. The Dravakian leaders exchanged uncertain glances. 5 people, just 5, to stop an enemy that had already destroyed half their planet. The weight of their situation pressed on them. They didn't have much time. Carr took a deep breath. We've heard of Earth, but we never expected help like this. Ash gave him a faint, emotionless smile. We don't help, we end. The Zarkon fleet appeared in the sky, their warships blotting out the sun. Their dark shapes cast long shadows over Dravik Prime as they descended toward the capital. The Dravakan leaders turned to the Earth soldiers. The Zarkons are coming. We don't have much time. What do we do? Ash looked at them. You wait. And we do what we do best. Without another word, Ash turned and walked toward the battlefield, his team following closely behind. They didn't run. They didn't hurry. They walked into the heart of the enemy, calm and collected, ready to face whatever came their way. The first explosions rocked the ground as the Zarkon ships landed, but the humans were already in motion. They didn't need numbers. They didn't need technology. They needed only what they had been trained for. War.Ash and his team moved forward. They became shadows in the chaos. They didn't attack with force, they attacked with precision. One by one, the Zarkon soldiers fell, each hit devastating, each move carefully planned. Back at the Dragian High Command, General Carr watched the battle unfold. His eyes widened with disbelief. They're not soldiers, Carr whispered. They're monsters. The monsters unleashed. The ground trembled as the Zarkon warships landed, their engines worry like hungry beasts. The Dravakian people had never seen such destruction. These were not mere soldiers, they were monsters, terrifying and relentless, laying waste to anything in their path. General Carr stood at the edge of the command center, his fists clenched tightly, watching the skies. The Zarkons had already begun their attack. Cities burned in the distance. There was no turning back now. What are those humans doing? One of the Dravakian officers asked, his voice filled with disbelief. They haven't even raised their weapons. Do they not understand how dangerous the Zarkons are? Carr said nothing. He couldn't speak. The truth was that he didn't understand it either. How could 5 people, just 5, face a fleet of Zarkon warships and an army of millions? Ash led his team through the smoke-filled battlefield, their movements swift and silent. They moved like shadows, blending with the chaos around them. The Zarkons were everywhere, troops advancing in waves, their guns blazing. Yet the humans never once hesitated. Ash didn't need to speak to his team. They all knew what needed to be done. Hex was the first to strike. She crouched behind a wrecked vehicle, her fingers working quickly to deploy a small device. A pulse of energy shot out, frying the Zarkon drones hovering overhead. Within seconds, the machines fell from the sky, sparks flying from their circuits. Hex didn't even glance at the wreckage. She simply moved on, her eyes locked ahead. Wraith was the next. A silent killer, she disappeared into the shadows, vanishing from sight. Zarkon soldiers searched in every direction, but she was already among them. Her blades were silent as they struck flesh and bone torn apart with precision. No noise, no warning. They fell one by one, the only sign left behind, the whisper of blood and silence. Meanwhile, Cutter marched straight into the heart of the enemy lines. The Zarkon soldiers tried to stop him, but he didn't even pause. His massive frame was unstoppable. He swung his giant axe, cutting through Zarkon armor like it was paper. His enemies scattered in terror as they realized that their weapons couldn't harm him. Ghost stayed in the background, moving like a breeze. He was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. He was watching, waiting for the perfect moment. He knew when to strike, and when he did, it was always at the most vulnerable point. No one saw him coming until it was too late. Together, the 5 humans moved through the battlefield, their teamwork flawless. They didn't speak to each other, but they didn't need to. They were all on the same mission, to end the Zarkon threat before it could take Dravik Prime. The Zarkon forces were in full retreat. Their soldiers had no idea how to deal with these new enemies. They had faced wars before, but nothing like this. Nothing had ever felt this personal. In a command tent at the heart of the Zarkon encampment, General Rekthal watched in disbelief as his troops were torn apart by the Earth soldiers. He slammed his fist on the table, his eyes burning with rage. "Who are these humans?" Rekthal growled. "They should be dead by now." But the truth was clear. The humans weren't just surviving, they were winning, and the Zarkons were losing. In the span of a few hours, the Earth soldiers had crippled the Zarkon offensive. The battlefield, once filled with the sounds of gunfire, was now silent, except for the footsteps of 5 soldiers. Back in the Dravakian command center, Carr stood with his arms crossed, staring at the feed from the battlefield. He had seen many battles in his life, but this one was unlike any other. The humans weren't just fighting, they were taking control. And it was terrifying. The Zarkons, who had been so confident of their victory, were now scrambling. Their warships had been disabled, their infantry scattered in panic. Every time they tried to regroup, one of the Earth soldiers would appear from nowhere and tear them apart. "They're not soldiers," Carr whispered, a note of awe in his voice. "They're something else." As the day wore on, the Dravakian forces watched the Earth soldiers take down Zarkon after Zarkon. It was not the Zarkon weapons that were defeating them. It wasn't their superior numbers. It wasn't even their war machines. It was the humans the monsters Earth had sent. As the final Zarkon warship began to retreat, Asher's voice came through the Dravakian comms. "Mission accomplished," he said, his tone flat. "The Zarkons are finished here." In the distance, the last Zarkon fleet pulled away, leaving Dravik Prime scarred but alive. The battlefield was littered with the wreckage of warships, and the air smelled of smoke and blood. The humans didn't celebrate. They didn't even acknowledge the Dravakians' gratitude. They simply turned and walked away. Carr, still standing in the command center, watched them go. He felt a mix of emotions: relief, awe, and something else he couldn't name. What are they?" Carr asked, his voice barely a whisper. Another Dravakian officer stepped forward, eyes wide. "They are not soldiers. They are the end." Carr nodded slowly. "Yes," he murmured, "the end." As the humans boarded their ship, their mission complete, no one spoke. They didn't need to. Their job had been simple. They had ended the war before it could even begin, and now they were going home. The Zarkon trap the battlefield was silent. The Zarkon fleet had fled. their warships scattering into the dark void of space. Dravik Prime was safe for now. The Earth soldiers, the so-called monsters, had completed their mission, and the Dravikian leaders could finally breathe. But the relief was short-lived. General Carr stood in the command center, staring at the empty sky on the monitor. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The Zarkans hadn't fought like this before. They didn't retreat so quickly. They didn't give up. There had to be something else, something deeper. It doesn't make sense. Carr muttered to himself. One of the officers looked at him, confused. What doesn't make sense, sir? The Zarkons are not known for their cowardice. They don't leave like this unless they have a plan. Carr's face tightened. They've been preparing for this moment. I'm sure of it. Meanwhile, Ash and his team were aboard their ship, preparing for departure. They were silent, as always. The mission was complete. They had done their job. Ash stood at the ship's controls, his eyes locked on the darkened horizon of Dravik Prime. His team moved in the background, preparing their gear. There was no celebration, no words exchanged. The job was done, and the team was ready to move on to the next one. But as Ash prepared to give the order to leave, Ghost stepped forward, his expression serious. We're being tracked. Ash didn't flinch. By who? Ghost paused, looking at the screens. Zarkan, they've set up a trap. Ash's voice was cold. They're still here. Back on Dravik Prime, General Carr received a new communication from the Dravikian military command. It was from the farthest reaches of their surveillance network. A warning signal blinked on the screen. Zarkon trap detected. Massive fleet incoming. Carr's heart sank. He had feared this moment. The Zarkans hadn't fled. They had regrouped. And now they were preparing for their final strike. He slammed his fist down on the table. Damn it, they've been waiting. They're coming back with everything they have. The officer beside him quickly relayed the message to Ash and his team. But there was no response. Ash's team didn't need words. The moment the warning came through, they were already moving. Cutter grabbed his weapons. Hex began working on the ship's systems. And Wraith and Ghost prepared for the coming fight. We're not leaving yet, Ash said, his voice firm. The Zarkans want a final showdown. And they're going to get one. Meanwhile, the Zarkon fleet was already descending. This time, it wasn't just a handful of ships. Thousands of warships, from fighters to dreadnoughts, appeared on Dravik Prime's horizon. The Zarkans had rallied everything they could. They weren't retreating anymore, they were attacking. General Rekthal stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking out at the mass of ships below. His face was a mask of cold anger. They think they've won, Rekthal sneered. Now we'll show them the true power of the Zarkon Empire. He turned to his commanders. Prepare the assault. This time, we crush them. The Zarkons weren't planning to leave Dravik Prime. They were planning to wipe it out. Back on the ground. Carr looked at the approaching fleet with a mix of fear and determination. We don't have the firepower to fight them off. We'll need Earth's monsters again. He quickly relayed the message to Ash. Get back here, now. The Zarkans are about to destroy everything we've just saved. But Ash's reply was simple. We're coming. We'll finish this. As the Earth soldiers prepared for the final battle, the Zarkon fleet surrounded Dravik Prime. Their ships were massive each, one a floating fortress, bristling with weapons. But Ash's team wasn't worried. They didn't need a fleet. They needed only themselves. The Earth soldiers dropped from their ship, landing silently on the planet's surface. The Zarkan forces had set up defenses, expecting a fight. They didn't know they were about to face something they could never understand. Ash looked at his team. We move as one. We hit them hard. They want to end this planet, but they've forgotten one thing. Hex looked up at him. What's that? They've forgotten who we are. The battle began. Zarkan warships filled the skies, firing massive energy blasts at the ground. Their soldiers charged forward, intent on wiping out everything. But the Earth soldiers didn't retreat. They didn't even flinch. Ghost moved first, his blades flashing as he took down an entire group of Zarkan soldiers with a single strike. Wraith followed, disappearing into the smoke. Hex's devices fried the Zarkon tech, causing their weapons to malfunction. Cutter was unstoppable, tearing through the Zarkon ranks like a wrecking ball, and Ash, he walked through the chaos, his eyes locked on the heart of the Zarkon fleet. He wasn't there to fight a battle. He was there to end it. The Zarkans had set a trap, but they didn't know it was already too late. The humans weren't the ones who were going to be caught. They were the ones who were going to end the war. Asterisk. No heroes, only monsters. The air over Dravik Prime was thick with the smell of smoke and fire. The Zarkon fleet filled the skies, blocking out the sun. Their massive warships loomed like shadows over the shattered cities below. It was the final assault, the last chance for the Zarkans to wipe out Dravik Prime and crush any hope of resistance. But they had underestimated Earth. The Dravakian leaders watched from their command center as Earth's soldiers moved with deadly precision across the battlefield. The Zarkon forces, once confident in their overwhelming power, were now in chaos. The monsters Earth had sent were unlike anything they had ever faced. General Carr stood at the window, his eyes narrowing as he watched the humans work. They didn't fight like soldiers. They didn't fight for glory. They fought like predators. Unstoppable. They're not here to save us, Carr whispered. They're here to end it. Ash, Ghost, Wraith, Cutter, and Hex moved together as one unit, cutting through the Zarkon ranks. They didn't need orders. They didn't need strategy. Their bond was unspoken, their movements fluid and deadly. The Zarkon soldiers fell before them, their weapons useless. Their strength no match for the humans. Relentless onslaught. Ash's eyes burned with a cold fire as he surveyed the battlefield. The Zarkans had set their trap. They thought they could overwhelm Earth soldiers with numbers and firepower. But the humans had been prepared for this. They didn't need an army, they were the army. Wraith slipped through the smoke, a ghost in the chaos. She moved so quickly that the Zarkan soldiers didn't know what hit them. One moment they were standing, weapons raised. The next, they were crumpled on the ground, silent and still. Hex's devices pulsed with energy as she scrambled through. Enemy lines. Every Zarkon weapon she touched was disabled. Tanks stopped moving. Drones fell from the sky. The Zarkon technology, advanced and powerful, was no match for her. Cutter was a storm of destruction. He slammed through Zarkon soldiers with his massive fists, tearing apart their defenses. He didn't stop. He didn't hesitate. Every punch landed with crushing force. Every step left destruction in its wake. General Rekthal, commanding the Zarkon fleet from his flagship, watched the carnage unfold. His hands shook as he gripped the controls of his ship. What are they? Rekthal muttered, his voice tinged with fear. He had fought countless wars, but this was different. The humans weren't just fighting, they were breaking. The Zarkons, he turned to his commanders. Gather the fleet. We end this now. Focus everything on them. But it was too late. The humans were already in their midst, moving with deadly speed, cutting their forces down one by one. Rekthal's last words were a whisper of disbelief. We've made a mistake. Ash stood in the center of the battlefield, his eyes locked on the Zarkon flagship. He could feel the Zarkon generals' panic, could sense the growing fear rippling through their ranks. The Zarkons weren't warriors, they were conquerors, used to crushing everything in their path. But these humans, they weren't here to conquer. They were here to end the war, to remind the galaxy what Earth was capable of. Ash raised his hand, signaling his team to fall back. The Zarkon forces had been broken. The battle was won, but Ash knew the fight wasn't over. There was still one last task, as the Earth soldiers moved toward the heart of the Zarkon fleet. General Carr watched from the Dravakian command center. He had seen Earth's soldiers fight, but he had never seen anything like this. They didn't care about victory. They didn't care about glory. They cared only about destroying their enemies. They're not heroes, Carr said, almost to himself. They're monsters. He wasn't wrong. The final showdown took place in the heart of the Zarkon flagship, where Ash faced General Rekthal. One-on-one, the Zarkon leader, desperate to defend his ship, drew his weapon and charged. But Ash didn't flinch. He stood his ground. You should have stayed in your own galaxy, Ash said, his voice cold. Rekthal lunged. But Ash was faster. In a blur of motion, Ash disarmed the general and knocked him to the ground. He didn't kill him. He didn't need to. The message had been made. As Rekthal lay on the floor, his weapon broken and his body bruised, Ash turned away. The battle was over. The Zarkons had lost. They would never return to Dravok Prime. The Dravakian leaders, watching from their command center, could only stare in stunned silence as the Zarkon flagship fell into chaos. The Zarkons had not only been defeated, they had been humiliated. Their greatest weapon, their pride, had been torn apart by 5 humans. But even as the victory was sealed, Ash's team didn't celebrate. They didn't cheer. They didn't even look back at the destruction they had left in their wake. They simply walked away. They weren't heroes. They didn't need to be. The Earth soldiers boarded their ship, leaving the ruined battlefield behind. Them, the Dravakian leaders, had done nothing to stop them, and nothing to thank them. They knew that the humans didn't want praise. They didn't need it. They only needed one thing. The mission. Ash looked back at the planet one last time. The war was over. Dravok Prime had been saved. But not by heroes, by monsters.